The Blue Hills transforms each season. Today you'll get a personal tour of what you'll see when you visit the Blue Hills this spring and hear about what disrupts this natural cycle. I'm Judy Lehrer-Jacobs, the Executive Director of the Friends of the Blue Hills.
I'm Rick Kesley. I'm a biologist from UMass Boston, and I guess I'm going to tell you a little bit about the spring cycle, or spring as part of the cycle.
And we are at Ponkapog Pond. If you've been to Ponkapog, we'd love to know in the comments with a yes or no. You are watching Blue Hills Alive, your weekly guide to the Blue Hills, sponsored by Tom O'Neill of Success Realty in Milton. And if you like hiking the Blue Hills and seeing the signs of spring, you'll want to download our free chart of 19 of the best trails in the Blue Hills. And you can go to friendsofthebluehills.org/chart. And there'll be a link in the comments as well. So let's start. So Rick, you want to start out by giving an overview of what's going on in the forest in the spring?
Well, as you can see here, everything's green and lovely. And as you know, that New England is a very harsh climate. All of you probably witnessed that this year, this spring. And you probably go hide inside your house during these nor'easters and various things like that. But obviously the plants cannot go anywhere. The animals in the Blue Hills cannot go anywhere. And so they've all got some really amazing adaptations. We often think of spring as the beginning, but it's really, they've been here the whole winter and they've managed to survive this whole winter. And spring is simply just the continuation of a long cycle. So I was going to just talk a little bit about some of the cycles, some of the adaptations that the plants here have that you see normally and you might not really think about on a general level.
Great. So what are we going to look at first?
Well, if you look here, you can see all the trees, or most of the trees are starting to leaf out. I like to point out again, I'm emphasizing the adaptations here, and point out you see over this area, very commonly, this is white pine, and as you know, white pine stays green all year round. So here are plants that were able to adapt in a totally different way than most of the things that you generally think about. Most things that are green-leafed are flowering plants, although we'll talk about some ferns today. Pines adapted to this harsh climate here, and as you know, they're often northern. They have needles. The needles are round, have a cuticle attached to them. I can grab one here.
You can just walk over.
So this is white pine, has these needles. This thing never loses its leaves, so it has a different way to adapt to the winter harshness. The leaves are very waxy, they're very condensed, they have low surface area. If you look at pines, they're often, the leaves themselves, because they're thin like this, do not collect heavy snow. And if you look at pines, pines are often sort of triangular. That's also, or cone shaped, that's also part of its adaptation to avoid heavy snow, things like that. A wide-leafed plant like this happens to be witch hazel, I'll come back to it in a second. You can imagine in the winter, these leaves were very thin, they'll get ravaged by the cold. The snow would land on them. Way down the trees, you would break branches. So conifers, pines, have a way to survive the winter that's quite different from the flowering plants that we see. So that's, one way to do it, to survive the winter here. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say in a minute we'll get back to kind of what threatens this whole cycle.
Okay.
But what else are we going to look at?
Well, now moving on, let's walk this way. So I mentioned these evergreen pines, and if we come in here, you can see that pines are not the only thing that are evergreen. And I will show you here. Some of you have already know this, and I'm still looking. I told Judy I have to put my glasses on periodically to see stuff. Here we go. So right here, you can look at this sort of cluster of plants down here, and most of them are very light green, and they're brand new leaves. And then underneath that, you see this, which is wintergreen, and wintergreen has been here like this all winter. So it has a different way to adapt to the harsh climate here. The snow can pile on it. It has very thick leaves, and it's able to survive the cold that way. And it has an advantage over some of these other plants because it's on the forest floor, but it can start photosynthesizing immediately, which pines do as well. As soon as the sun is out, as soon as there's sun there, these things can photosynthesize and get sort of a head start on the spring. Pines do that all the time. Wintergreen does that as soon as the snow melts, and before the canopy is filled in, they probably do most of their photosynthesizing. So that's an adaptation that's sort of different from most of the rest of the things you see here. Everything else in this picture that we're looking at are pretty much brand new leaves. They're not evergreens. And so how do they survive the winter? They survive the winter, as you all know. They lose their leaves in the fall, and that seems very costly, but they can't survive the winter because they're very thin leaves. Their adaptation is definitely more for, this is maple leaf viburnum. Their adaptation is definitely for broad, wide leaves to collect as much sunlight for photosynthesis as possible. Unlike a pine tree, it's sort of being adapted to survive the winter more. So these things, many of these things in the trees that we're looking at, lose their leaves in the winter or in the fall, and then begin again the cycle in the springtime. And you probably understand, you think about that, losing your leaves every year and then having to make new leaves every year seems like a costly enterprise. But you probably know a lot more about that than you think. You notice that in the fall, all the leaves lose their color and become brittle and brown and fall off. What the tree is doing is absorbing all the carbohydrates, the nutrients, and then pulling those into the trunks of the tree. They sit there sort of quiescent all winter long. And then in springtime, all those rich resources, the carbohydrates, the sugars, start being pumped up to the tops of the trees or into these perennials if they have underground roots and they're pulling up these resources to reproduce these leaves. So it's not as costly as you might think because the leaves of the plants have adapted to pull as much resources out. And most of you who are from New England probably are very thankful for this because that's the whole idea behind getting maple syrup. The maple syrup is catching the maples when it gets still cold nights, warm days, and the resources that have been pulled into the tree during the fall are now going back to the top. People go in, tap that, you get that maple, that sap that's high in sugars, and you boil that down to give you the maple syrup. So that's a different strategy that the perennials in here, the things that are long-lived, have to survive this winter here. Moving on, so that's sort of the tree thing. And you can see here there are many different kinds of trees. So I mentioned this one already. This is witch hazel. And I really like this plant. This witch hazel has this medicinal purpose that everybody talks about. It was a little industry in Connecticut at one time. I'm not really sure how big it is anymore. But witch hazel is interesting because it flowered like middle of the winter. It's the only thing I know that flowers in the winter, and it has these very odd little flowers. I really don't know what pollinates it, but it has a really different strategy. It flowers first, leaves second. You look through here and you can see, let me find some other things here. Oops, sorry, not turning around too much. Oh, here. So this here is a oak, and you can see the leaves are just barely starting. And oaks, the witch hazel, the leaves are wide open. I look around and I can show you some maples, sugar maples are here. Leaves are wide open. It is interesting that southern New England is kind of at the interface between southern oak forests, so this is about as northern as this thing will get, and the northern hardwoods like maples and things like that. So they're a little more, maples are a little more adapted to the cold, so they've already opened their leaves. They're getting a head start in the oaks, but the oaks tend to last a little bit longer into the fall. So the different species are at different stages in their part of their cycle right now. So anyways, these are the oaks, and the maples are in here. I can show you those too. Let's look on the ground as well. We'll keep coming this way. And there's a lot of little bitty herbaceous plants down here. They've survived the winter. Most everything that we're seeing here are fresh new leaves. And they've survived the winter by dying back. Several of these are perennials, so they have underground roots, or it's actually really underground stems. They're called rhizomes. And they basically do the same thing the trees do, bring the resources into those underground stems and then distribute those and start popping back up to the surface. So some of the things that we have in here, ooh, perfect. There, we got one in flower. So this is called a bellwort family. Uvularia is the genus. And it's, I think this one is also called, one of the common names is wild oats. And it's in the lily family, and it looks like a little lily flower. And I'm actually happy that we found one. I found a couple others that had fallen off already. There's other things in here. This is very common. You see this, and we'll see it's beginning to flower. This is Canadian Mayflower, and it's just like single leaves here. But when we see it flowering, it'll get a couple of different leaves in a small flower, or cluster of flowers. And it's also in the lily family. And these are starting to pop up. And then let's come this way a little bit more, and then we're going to walk back that way, because there's more flowers that way, and I want to make sure you see all the flowers possible. We'll get as far as this rock. Here's more wintergreen again, which is evergreen, and I mentioned before, and it's underground roots here. It crawls around. It's probably connected to this plant here, and it stays green all winter. That's why it's called wintergreen. And then we get to the rock here, and you've got several things in here. So here's Canadian Mayflower again, and then this fern is it's a polypodium. It's called rock fern, for obvious reasons maybe. I'm not really making that up. It is really called rock fern, and it's on the rocks, and it's just one of many ferns. This tends to be evergreen also, surviving the winter underneath the snow. Oops, watch out right there. That's poison ivy. Poison ivy is not evergreen, and it's got brand new leaves there, and they tend to be kind of reddish in the beginning of the season. So don't touch that. So a number of different things. Oh, and I should mention here's obviously the mosses. Mosses tend to be adapted to very wet climates. They do stay evergreen, but they survive under the snow all winter. And they do much of their photosynthesizing right now before the leaves and the canopy is completely filled in, but they're pretty adapted to being dark a lot of the time. So mosses I always kind of like, and right now they're not very, it's very dry. It hasn't rained here for a little bit for the last few days, but the mosses tend to absorb a lot of water when they get rained on because they don't really have a root system. They're never, you can see here, they're just right on the surface of the rock. So they have never been, they've never adapted vascular systems, so they can't get tall, they can't have roots that go down. They have to collect the water right on top of themselves. Different adaptation to the habitat that they're on. So, should we come back this way now?
Sure.
There's a lot of other things in here. A lot of the plants that you can see here that are a little shrubby are actually blueberries, and we'll see some low bush and high bush blueberries popping up here shortly. Oh, here. And some of them are starting to be in flower. There'll be better flowers, so I'll show you in a second. There's, let's see, what else we got in here? Well, this is a sugar maple. Little one here, you probably can't see it very well, but you can see the three to five little leaves that look like this. They're starting to unfold, and there's what else we have? Yellow birches, and let me think. Oh well, I'll get to my favorite flower back here now. That's right, I have to not stare at the camera here. A couple of my favorite flowers right here. Voila! So this flower here, and they're just beginning to flower. So if you get to come out this weekend, you really see this. It's my favorite scientific name of all plants. It's Trientalis borealis, which means northern starflower. And that's the borealis is the northern, the Trientalis is the star. And it is a common flower here. It only flowers very early in the season right now, probably the next week or so. I've seen a lot of them that have just buds, like right there, but you'll see patches where there's some, so those haven't opened yet. They'll probably be open tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And so just depending on where you're looking, they're going to be popping up for the next week or so. So if you get a chance, come out and see those. They, again, typical herbaceous plant on the floor of the forest here. And coming this way, there's some other things. I'll show you this again. You can see this thing is also underground root, and it's popping up. And this is wild sarsaparilla, and I'm going to show you it again because there's ones on the road just down a little bit that are actually beginning to flower. And it's in the ginseng family, that thing.
So I hope that you're seeing some of the things that you've seen before, but maybe from a different perspective. So if you want to say in the comments whether you've already seen some of these plants, we would love to know. Do you want to continue?
Sure. So let's walk out to the road now. We'll go up a little bit and find a few more things to talk about.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the road and how that affects the plants as well, and kind of any other
That's an excellent question, Judy. As we walk up the road, one thing you'll see, if you look at the side of the road here, we'll come up here a little more. I don't have to probably tell anybody what this is. A lot of people don't like these things, but I really like dandelions. These things are originally from Europe, but it's non-native. And so if we're on the side of the road, one thing roads do, they're corridors to bringing in sort of weedy things that aren't typically found in the forest. Fortunately, most of them, dandelions is incredibly weedy, but it's not considered invasive because it doesn't actually go much beyond this. It's found, again, all over the world. I was in Peru last year in Machu Picchu, and there's dandelions flowering in Machu Picchu. So I love that. There's also some clovers in here. Oh, and this is Judy. This is your favorite plant. Oh shoot, I picked it up. Oh, what is this, Judy?
garlic mustard.
Yes, and what are we going to do with it?
Eat it.
So there's actually a book out there. It says about invasive species, and the title of the book is if you can't beat them, eat them. And there's recipes for all sorts of nice invasive species. Garlic. This is garlic mustard. It's a biannual, so it takes 2 years to flower. So this is 2 years old. It started off, probably looked like this, you know, just like a little leaf last year on the ground. And then it grows as 1 year just totally vegetatively, and then the next year it pops up and flowers. And this is Judy's group has been spending a lot of time trying to remove this from various places. But if you can see, if we were to look here and you could see as well as I can, you'll see that this is all over the edge of the roads here. So the road has allowed these weedy things to get here, and this is considered invasive, unlike dandelions, because it will get further and further into the forest and into habitats that are sort of, you would consider natural. So the roads do cause problems. Roads obviously will cause erosion. You can see erosion effects on the side over here, and that tends to wash things downhill. So there's a lot of effects of these roads. You're putting it back? She put it back. I thought you were going to eat it all. Keep coming this way, and we'll see some more things. So here, there's more poison ivy right here. Just pointing that out. Keep people in mind. It's looking reddish now, but it will be just pure, shiny green shortly. So don't be fooled by the red color now. Let's see. Still looking. I wanted to find some the blueberries in flower, which are up here slightly. And also the wild sarsaparilla and some of the ferns. Okay, well, ferns. There we go. These are just opening up right now. They're very sort of delicate ferns. And this is hay-scented fern, I believe. It's a little hard to tell until they're fully open, but I believe that's hay-scented fern, and that's a pretty common fern around here in the forest. And coming. Oh, well, there's some more things. I'm off the ferns, but this is that maple leaf viburnum. It looks like, you know, kind of a common looking maple leaf look. It's beginning to flower here. It hasn't flowered yet. And again, this is a native common shrub here found in throughout New England in the forest here. Pointing some things out. Ooh. Not yet. That is blueberry, but I saw some really nice ones up here. Lots of low bush blueberries in here. Very common. Let's see. Let's cross the street. Here's another fern. Very common. This one right there, you can see it's always got these three parts. This is bracken fern. This has been called, some people have called this the most cosmopolitan plant in the world, naturally speaking. It's found throughout northern, the entire northern parts of the world. Europe, Asia, North America. You can eat it when it's in its frond state, when it's all curled up. And it is also a perennial. It has underground rhizomes. So this is another common fern here that has its own way of surviving through the winter and now popping up.
So Carol McDonald has a question. Do you want to read it?
Sure. It says, have you seen lilies yet? We always call them tiger lilies, and they're orange.
What was the plant again?
Tiger lilies, or the orange lilies, daylilies.
I've seen them in my garden, but I haven't seen them in the wild yet. So I think they tend to flower a little bit later. You know, you have, well, even in my garden, I think I haven't seen tiger lilies yet. So it's a little too early.
But thanks for asking.
Thank you. I haven't seen any here. Well, again, this is one of those plants that it's still red. It's just popping up. There's oak right there. It also kind of reddish leaves capturing different wavelengths of the sun on the forest floor. I think this is world yellow loosestrife. It's a native plant here. I think it is. It tends to have leaves in whorls, 4 of them, 4, and it will make little yellow flowers coming out from the axils of the leaves later in the summer. But it's just popping up now, just, you know, germinated, popping up, and then showing up here in the side of the road here. Here's more of the bracken fern. Ooh, in here. You have now, here's a nice little violet. Violets are flowering at this time of year. This one is, I believe, northern downy violet. It has kind of unusual leaves. Most leaves, you think of violets, and they're sort of these heart-shaped leaves. And this one has very long leaves, and it tends to, you can see, I don't know if you can see it on the screen there, but the stems and the leaves tend to be a little fuzzy. That's the downy part. So it's northern downy violet. There's other violets here too. I saw sort of a more common violet that's also flowering, big purple flower.
We do have a request from Dan DeHiley. Can we get a close-up on the low bush blueberries?
Yes. I'm looking for them in flower. Well, they're not quite. You can look here, and you can see the flowers, these urn-shaped flowers, and they're not open yet. But this is one of the low bush. There's several different types of blueberries in here. This is one of them. So there's tiny little flowers. There's a high bush over here that is wide open with flowers that I'll show you in a second if we keep coming this way. Well, here we have, again, I mentioned maples. So there's your sugar maple starting to, looks like it's sugar maple. Just leaves starting to open. Again, it's wider, it's more, it's a little bit ahead of the oaks that we saw a minute ago, but because it's more adapted to the cold climate than oaks are. Sorry, looking at my back, I'll keep going this way. Keep following me, we're getting closer.
What are we looking for now?
So there are, again, a bunch of other trees here that you're probably used to. I'll point out until we get to where I would like to show you a few more things. So this is a beech tree right here. It has very wide leaves. It tends to be very smooth bark. Beech trees, if you ever see people, they shouldn't, but if you see initials carved into a tree, it's almost always beech, because it has very smooth bark compared to something like this, which is a white pine. Hard to carve your initials into that, easier to this. But it does harm the trees, and there's a disease that's infecting beeches because they're getting into those crevices. So it's not a good thing to do. Oh, okay, here's another. Well, that's... We're getting there. Here is the, again, this is the Canadian Mayflower. Many of these little single leaves here. And then here it is, it starts putting up a second leaf and starts to flower. It's also in the lily family, so we're a little ahead of this one. It's not quite ready yet. But you'll pretty soon see all those single little leaves on the floor here are going to probably pop a second leaf and then begin flowering in the near future. So there's another one right there. There's a bunch of them. In here. So they're about to flower.
So I think there's a lot to look at here. Oh, no, I don't think so.
Sorry.
I don't think so. Maybe we should wrap up.
Wrap up. I do want to catch, somebody wanted to see flowers of these. Maybe if you want me to run up the road, I'll grab some. But you probably...
Well, why don't we take a photo? We'll take a photo and post it later.
I'd like to find the blueberry flowers. But we can wrap up.
Okay. Okay. Is there any last thing you want to say? Either about kind of what's disrupting the spring cycle or spring cycle in general?
Well, I can pull this out and sort of think about it. This here is green briar, and it's green briar because it has green stems. So this loses its leaves during here, but it photosynthesizes through its stems. It's got nasty thorns on it. Bicyclists hate this in the woods. You probably would too. And it again is, green briar is sort of native, but it really is aggressive in disturbed habitats. So in the Blue Hills, you'll see many places along the side of the main roads that have a lot of this, so much that you can't even walk through it. And that's because of the disturbed habitat. So even though it's native, it's not, it is pretty adapted to the disturbed habitat that we're creating by the roads and the damage that they cause. So other things that might be affecting the forest right now. Well, of course, the deer that people talk about. It's hard to tell the deer right now. There's certainly plenty of vegetation. I did see some of the bracken ferns on the side of the road have been chewed. So the bracken ferns are eaten by some of the deer.
That's so sweet. Who is it that said that?
Somebody sent a message?
Carol McDonald and Lori Broderick both gave us compliments on this little nature walk.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I guess
That's
that's my
really
cue to wrap up. So, I can't quite get everything that I want to see because it's not all in the same place. But if I do this again, I'll try to make sure I sort of find the spot that has as much of what would be fun to talk about in the short term here.
Well, luckily, you're coming back.
Okay, I am. Okay, I'm coming back.
Frank is definitely coming back. Thank you so much for watching Blue Hills Alive, your weekly guide to the Blue Hills, sponsored by Tom O'Neill of Success Realty. And thanks, Rick. And if you like hiking in the Blue Hills and seeing all the amazing things that Rick has pointed out, you'll want to download our free guide. It's called the Find Your Trail Chart. And it's at friendsofthebluehills.org/chart, and there's going to be a link in the comments below. And hope to see you next Thursday at noon.